Well, hello, everybody. We're here for the SBA Certification Webinar, and I know there are people who will be streaming in to join us. My name is Greg Duffer. I'm the Director of Small Business Services here at Good Work Network, and I'm joined today by our guest panelist and instructor, Ms. Joanne Lawrence, who is the Deputy District Director of the New Orleans District Office of the U.S. Small Business Administration. So I'm going to let Joe take over from here, and I'm going to put my camera on mute. And if you have any questions, please use the chat function, which I believe is also Q&A, and we'll address the questions at the end of the session. So, Joe, you can get started. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to look at the federal government certifications and share with you how they can be beneficial to you. So next slide, please. So today we'll look at the 8A Business Development Program, the HUBZone Program, the Woman-Owned Small Business, and the Service Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business certification programs. Next slide, please. So when you're looking at which certification you're going to pursue, then of course, if it's the federal government, you want to consider 8A because it also certifies you as a small disadvantaged business. The HUBZone, or historically underutilized business zone program, there are set-asides for our service disabled veteran-owned small businesses, as well as women-owned small businesses and economically disadvantaged women-owned small businesses. Now, those certifications would also be beneficial to you not only as a prime contractor with the federal government, but also as a subcontractor with our large prime federal government contractors, because the goals that we're going to discuss in a moment are flow down goals to each of those prime contractors. And if you're looking at private industry, then that's when you want to look at the Minority Business Enterprise, or WBE, Women's Business Enterprise, or WBE, or Small Disadvantaged Business and HUBZone. And then of course, with the state and local government agencies, the DBE certification under the Louisiana Unified Certification Program, the Small and Emerging Business Development Certification, Hudson Initiative, Veterans Initiative, and the state and local disadvantaged business enterprise certification. Next slide, please. So with the federal government, there is a 23% overall federal government goal to do business with small businesses. We estimate that the government spends approximately $500 billion annually. And of that, we want 23% to go to small businesses, 5% for small disadvantaged businesses, which includes 8A, 5% for women, 3% for our service disabled veterans, and 3% for historically underutilized business zones, or HUB zones. Now, we've met all of these goals at least once, except for the HUBZone program. We're still struggling to meet that 3%. And in fiscal year 2019, that was only the second time that we met the 5% goal for women-owned small businesses. Next slide, please. In fiscal year 2019, approximately 26.50% of the total federal government spend went to small businesses, and that equated to in excess of $132 billion. So there is value in doing business with the federal government and through our socioeconomic programs like the 8A Business Development Program. Next slide, please. This program is a business development program with a primary focus on business development. However, it does have a contracting component. And the purpose of the program is to foster business ownership by individuals who are socially and economically disadvantaged, to promote the competitive viability of those firms through awarding contracts on a sole source or limited competitive basis. And also we work to clarify and expand the program to the extent that the federal government is given an opportunity to contract more with small disadvantaged businesses. Next slide, please. Of course, for all of these programs, because we're talking about small business programs, you have to be small in your primary industry classification. For 8A, socially and economically disadvantaged individuals who are U.S. citizens must unconditionally own, control, and manage the company on a daily basis. They must have good character, and they must be able to demonstrate that they have the potential for success. And one of the things they have to demonstrate to SBA is that they have been in business for at least 2 full years in its primary industry classification, as evidenced by revenues on their income tax returns. Next slide, please. So when we look at the social disadvantage aspect, because you have to qualify as both socially and economically disadvantaged, we're considering whether or not you've been subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice or cultural bias without anything to do with your ability to perform on contracts. And it must stem, whatever discrimination or prejudice to which you have been subjected must stem from circumstances beyond your control. There are certain designated groups which are presumed to be socially disadvantaged, and they are Black Americans, Hispanic Americans, Native Americans, Asian Pacific Americans, and subcontinent Asian Americans. Next slide, please. Those individuals who do not fall within one of those named groups may be able to establish social disadvantage on the basis of a preponderance of evidence. And basically that individual is sharing with us where they've been discriminated against due to a disability or physical handicap or their gender. And these must be personal experiences to which that individual has been subjected, something that's substantial, chronic, and that occurred in the American society, and it had a negative impact on education, employment, and or business history. Next slide, please. Economically disadvantaged individuals must also qualify as socially disadvantaged. And in respect to this, that means that you've been subjected to difficulty in the free enterprise system in getting capital on reasonable terms and credit on reasonable terms. We no longer require that you submit a narrative statement. I need to update this slide. However, you are required to submit personal financial information. We do require personal financial statements for the individuals claiming disadvantaged status and their spouse. Next slide, please. So in order to qualify as economically disadvantaged, your adjusted personal net worth must be less than $750,000 for initial and continued eligibility. And the adjustment means that this excludes the value of your ownership in the business, the equity in your personal residence, and any IRA accounts that you have. And these IRA accounts must meet the IRS standards. Your personal income as an individual, as an average for the past 3 years, may not exceed $350,000, and the fair market value of all of your assets may not exceed $6 million. Next slide, please. When we look at ownership, we're looking at unconditional and direct ownership. And those individuals who are claiming disadvantage must own 51% of the company, and they must be U.S. citizens. The direct ownership means that it's by an individual and not by another business entity or not by a trust. The unconditional ownership simply means that your ownership is not subject to any conditions. And if there are stock options for someone to purchase ownership in your company, SBA will consider those stock options as having been exercised. Next slide, please. Once you use your eligibility to qualify one firm for the Section 8A program, for purposes of qualifying another firm for the 8A program, you would be considered a non-disadvantaged person. So there's a one-time eligibility requirement. We also have restrictions on immediate family members participating in the 8A program at the same time that you're in the program. And this is specific to those individuals who may be in the same type of business or industry in which you're operating, or that may have ownership in your company. And there are restrictions that if one entity or individual has 10% ownership in one 8A firm, then they can have no more than 10% interest in another 8A participant at the same time. Also, in looking at the ownership restrictions, in addition to considering familial relationships, we also look at contractual relationships as well. Next slide, please. Control is not the same as ownership. Generally, what we'll hear from someone is, I own 51%, so that means I control the company. Not necessarily. When we're looking at control, we're looking at who's in charge of the day-to-day operations, who sets the strategic policy, who controls the board of directors, who has the managerial capability, technical expertise to operate the company, who's the highest compensated. So there are a number of factors that go into determining who controls the company. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at control also, we also look at the role that non-disadvantaged individuals have in the company. And so for purposes of the Section 8A program, a non-disadvantaged person is anyone upon whom SBA has not determined that they are disadvantaged. So you may have someone who falls within one of the named groups. However, if they do not use their eligibility to qualify the company for the 8A program, they're considered non-disadvantaged. And a non-disadvantaged person may not exercise control or have the power to control the company, either through financial relationships, bonding relationships, or guaranteeing loans, or being the qualifying individual on any required licenses or permits. Nor can a non-disadvantaged individual be the former employer of the disadvantaged owner or a principal of a former employer of the disadvantaged owner, nor can they receive a higher compensation than the disadvantaged owner. Next slide, please. So when we look at compensation, we're not just looking at the salary, we're looking at any money that goes out of the company to another owner, be it through bonuses, dividends, loans, or whatever the case may be. Some of the negative control factors that we consider are whether or not there was a transfer of the majority stock ownership or control of the company to an immediate family member, and that occurred within the past 2 years. Whether or not the board of directors, if you're a corporation, is controlled by the disadvantaged individuals. That's going to be determined by your bylaws if you are a corporation. If they're providing critical financial or bonding support, if they're the qualifying individuals on any required licenses, and I mentioned the control through loan agreements, and if there are other business relationships between the two companies. Next slide, please. When we look at the potential for success, this has reference to our 2-year rule. However, if a company has not been in business for at least 2 full years, as evidenced by revenues on their income tax returns, they can apply for a waiver of the 2-year rule. And when we're looking at the revenues on the income tax returns, they must be in your primary industry classification or your primary NAICS code, and they must be consecutive 2 years. If you're going to request a waiver, you must be able to demonstrate to SBA that the disadvantaged individuals have substantial business management experience to operate that company, that they have the requisite technical expertise and know-how to perform on contracts, that there's adequate capital available, and if bonding is required, that they're able to get the bonding needed to perform on contracts, that they're able to provide to SBA a listing of contracts on which they have successfully performed, and that they have the ability to obtain whatever personnel, facilities, equipment that may be necessary to perform on contracts. Next slide, please. Additional eligibility criteria includes good character. So the disadvantaged individuals cannot be on parole or probation or incarcerated, must not have violated any of SBA's regulations or other federal agency regulations. You must be current on any federal financial obligations. That includes SBA loans, student loans, and your income tax returns. Because we only contract with the federal government within the Section 8A program, you cannot be debarred or suspended or otherwise ineligible for federal government contracting, cannot lack business integrity, and must not have been indicted or entered a guilty plea or convicted of civil judgment or settlement. Now, regarding wholesalers, if you're in the business of providing products or supplies, you must qualify as a regular dealer. And what that means is that you maintain a supply of the items that you're proposing to sell to the federal government, and those items are available on a regular basis, which means that brokers are not eligible. Brokers add nothing of value to the items that they're proposing to sell to the federal government. Next slide, please. Franchises are eligible. However, SBA must review the franchise agreement to ensure that it is in compliance with the 8A criteria. Nonprofit organizations are not eligible because nonprofit organizations do not qualify as small businesses. And then, of course, if this concern is one that is owned by other disadvantaged businesses, or if the company that's applying for certification now, if at least 50% of their assets are the same assets of a former 8A participant, then we would consider that this new applicant has already used their eligibility. Next slide, please. So what are the benefits of the Section 8A program? We can award sole source contracts for services, construction, and supplies up to $4 million, and manufacturing contracts up to $7 million. So what does sole source mean? Sole source means that you're not competing. An offer is made to SBA, we accept the offer on behalf of a firm, and that firm negotiates with the federal government. We also can award 8A competitive contracts. And if the contract exceeds $4 million for services, construction, and supplies, and $7 million for manufacturing, we can accept that contract for 8A competition, and competition is restricted to 8A firms. If it is a construction contract, then we will limit competition to 8A firms in Louisiana. You're also eligible for subcontracting opportunities with the major primes because 8A certification automatically certifies you as a small disadvantaged business. You are eligible to enter into a mentor-protege agreement with a large business or a small business, and then subsequently enter into a joint venture for small business set-asides, including 8A contracts, and the rules of affiliation would not apply. You're certified for 9 years, so you will be assigned to a business opportunity specialist who will work with you throughout your 9 years and provide management and technical assistance, training, and counseling to you. Next slide, please. We also host an 8A retreat, which is our annual 8A meeting where we provide specific training as has been determined by what we hear from you. You're certified for 9 years. The first 4 years are the developmental stage, and then the remaining 5 years, the transitional stage. The transitional stage is designed to prepare you for re-entry into the competitive arena. So as a result, there are certain business activity targets which you must meet each year that you're in the transitional stage. So for year 5 is 15%, year 6, 25%, 7, 35%, 8, 45%, and the 9th year, 55%. And what that means is that these percentages for each particular year must make up that portion of your non-8A sales. So if you fail to meet this target for any year, when you're in the transitional stage, we have to withhold sole source contracts from you. Next slide, please. The application is fully electronic. You would apply via certified.sba.gov. You have to have an active SAM registration, and you will link your SAM registration to your certified profile when you set that up. Now, please make sure that when you get ready to access certified.sba.gov, that you have not made any changes or updates to your SAM profile within the last 48 hours. The reason is that if you make a change within the last 48 hours and you attempt to link your profile, you'll get the results business not found. So just make sure that you don't make any changes to your SAM profile within 48 hours of attempting to apply for 8A. The processing time is going to vary, and that depends upon your submitting to us a complete application. We cannot process incomplete packages. They will be returned to you. It may be that we will have to request supporting information. If we do, the agency will communicate directly with you. So it's important that we have good phone numbers and email addresses, and whatever our decision is will be in writing. Next slide, please. So knowledge check. A subcontinent Asian owns 100% of a 5-year-old business. The owner is a resident alien. Is this business eligible for the Section 8A program? Please type yes or no in the chat. Okay, I see one response. I see a few. Okay, so the individual would not be eligible because they are not a U.S. citizen. In order to apply for certification in the 8A program and any of the other programs, the owners must be U.S. citizens. So thank you all for responding. We appreciate that. Okay, next slide, please. A business that was started in 2010 has been dormant for the past 3 years with no gross receipts or revenues. Does this business satisfy the potential for success requirement? Please type yes or no in the chat. Okay, thank you all for participating. Unfortunately, the answer is no, because in order to satisfy the potential for success requirement, they must have had revenues in their primary industry classification for the past 2 consecutive years. And if a business has been dormant for 3 years and they haven't had any revenues or receipts, they would not be eligible. So thank you all so much for participating. Let's look at the HUBZone program. So the HUBZone program, HUBZone stands for, next slide please, Historically Underutilized Business Zone. And this is a contracting program without a business development program. Now, I neglected to mention that currently we have about 93 8A firms in Louisiana that have been certified. For our HUBZone firms, we have approximately 155 certified firms. And typically, these firms are located in areas where there is high unemployment and low income individuals. So the purposes of this program is to stimulate the economy in those areas where there is high unemployment and low income individuals. Next slide, please. So there are 3 components to this program. The federal agencies, who will set contracts aside and limit competition to those firms that SBA has certified. The small businesses who we certify and who are encouraged to invest in the qualified HUBZone areas and hire employees from a HUBZone area, and also those distressed communities, because those individuals who live in those communities are able to benefit from the job opportunities that are available and investment in those communities. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at the HUBZone program, the federal government, because they're looking to meet their 3% goal, they can set contracts aside and restrict competition to HUBZone firms. And this would include multiple award contracts, where you may see one solicitation, but you may have 5 contracts awarded from that one solicitation. Sole source contracts are also available. Now, when it comes to sole source contracts, this is different from what we can do within the 8A program. The contracting officer has to make a determination that there is no other HUBZone certified firm or small business who could actually compete for that contract. And also, if you are certified, you're eligible for a 10% price evaluation preference on contracts that are not set aside for any small business. So if you bid on a contract that's unrestricted, meaning it's not set aside for any of the socioeconomic groups, then if you, and the successful offerer rather, is a large business, one that exceeds the size standard for that solicitation, if your bid is within 10% of that large business's bid, then the contract will be awarded to you. That's how that 10% price evaluation preference works within the HUBZone program. Next slide, please. So beginning in 2020, SBA is expanding and securing the footprint by adding additional areas that are considered HUBZone, but also by freezing the maps. And the maps will be frozen until 2021. Stabilizing the eligibility. And what that does is it reduces the restrictive requirements that have been placed on the HUBZone certified firms. And also we're improving the customer experience by accelerating and streamlining the application and recertification process. And we'll talk a little bit about each of these shortly. Next slide, please. So the hub zones are located throughout the U.S. and its territories, and they are determined by a combination of unemployment, income, and or events. So an event could be a disaster event. They will include the qualified census tracts. So once the census data is input into our mapping program, it will cause some of the areas to change, either to become HUBZone, or it may become a redesignated area, meaning that it'll lose its HUBZone status in 3 years. They'll include qualified non-metropolitan parishes, including difficult development areas. Now, a difficult development area is an area outside of the contiguous United States. If you are in a redesignated area, then you will have 3 years to transition to a qualified census tract or qualified non-metropolitan parish. Qualified Indian reservations, and these are those that are recognized by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. If it's a BRAC facility, originally the BRAC facilities would be HUBZone designated for 5 years. That's been extended to 10 years. And I mentioned the qualified disaster areas and also governor designated areas. Next slide, please. So for the governor designated areas, this allows a governor to submit a request to SBA for a rural area that's not currently designated as HUBZone to be considered HUBZone. It must be a rural area that has a population of 50,000 or less, and the average unemployment rate is at least 120% of the average unemployment rate for the U.S. or for the state, whatever is lowest. Next slide, please. So when we're reviewing this, and this is submitted to the administrator, we're looking at what's the potential for job creation and investment in that area. And there must be a demonstrated interest from the small businesses in that area to want to participate in federal government contracting and be certified HUBZone. We also want to see how the state and local government officials have incorporated that rural area into their economic development strategy, and then the impact that it's going to have on the continued development of that area. Now, when we look at opportunity zones, you know, a lot of the HUBZone areas are already in opportunity zones, but in addition to a rural area, if it's an opportunity zone that's not already a HUBZone, we can also consider those. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the HUBZone maps are frozen until 2021, December 31st, but then after that time, they'll be updated every 5 years. This goes back to stabilizing the program, because prior to this going into effect, the mapping programs and the areas could change several times, even in between census. Because the unemployment rate may have changed or the poverty rate may have changed. So for instance, like generally around September or October, when we get updated unemployment numbers, that would cause the HUBZone maps to change. So now the good thing is they will only, the qualified areas will only be updated every 5 years. If for some reason you are in a redesignated area, or your area becomes redesignated after you're certified, then you will have 3 years to relocate to a designated HUBZone area. If, however, you're in a redesignated area and you've invested in that HUBZone area by either purchasing a building or entering into a lease of 10 years or more, you will still be able to maintain your HUBZone eligibility for 10 years. And we're looking at ways to leverage and maximize the small business participation in the opportunity zones, because what we've discovered is that 70% of the opportunity zones are located in hub zones. So this is what we're doing to secure the footprint and to try to draw more small businesses into applying for the HUBZone program and being eligible for HUBZone set-aside contracts. Next slide, please. Regarding the residency requirements, if you have an employee that has resided in a HUBZone area for at least 6 months at the time of certification or recertification, and that employee continues to reside in that HUBZone area for at least 6 months after certification or recertification, even if that employee moves after those 6 months, you will still be able to count that employee towards your percentage requirement, which is 35%, even if that employee moves to a non-HUBZone area. However, that employee must remain in your employ. Now, this would not apply if that employee left your organization and went to work for someone else. But if they remain with you and they move to another location, you would still be able to count them towards your percentage. And this was put in place to help meet that challenge of when employees move and you dropping below the 35% requirement. Next slide, please. Regarding the proof of certification, if you were certified at the time of your initial offer, when you submitted your offer on that contract, that HUBZone certified contract, you would maintain your eligibility throughout the life of the contract, even if your area is redesignated. And the only thing that would affect it is if the agency requires you to recertify that you are a small business and you no longer meet that small business size standard. However, once you're certified, you'll be eligible for any of the options that are exercised under the contract. So what you'll see is that there will be contracts that are multi-year, base year and 4 one-year options, or base year and 2 one-year options. You would still be able to maintain that contract as long as you can continue to meet the eligibility criteria, even if your area is redesignated. Next slide, please. On multiple award contracts, what you'll find, again, sometimes is that some of the agencies, after 5 years, they want you to recertify. You must be able to recertify that you are a small business in order to maintain that contract. Next slide, please. You will be required to recertify every year. And you would be submitting that information to SBA rather. Now this will be an electronic process. And so it is important that we have the current email address for you, because that's where the notice is going to be sent. Now, you'll have to do a full documentation recertification every 3 years. And that means you'll be submitting all of the required documents similar to what you submit at the time that you apply for HUBZone certification. Now, if you are someone who's active in getting federal contracts, meaning that you're getting a lot of contracts, SBA may require you to do a full documentation certification and review every year. Now, the reason for this is we have the responsibility to maintain, to the best of our ability, the integrity of this program. In addition to the recertification, if you're very active in receiving HUBZone contracts, then our local district office would be required to visit you at your location. And that's to confirm that you are who you say you are and you are where you say you are when you submitted your application. Next slide, please. So the basic criteria is that you must be located in a HUBZone area. The business has to be at least 51% unconditionally owned by U.S. citizens, and at least 35% of your employees must reside in a HUBZone area. It does not need to be the same area where the business is located. However, there is what we call an attempt to maintain requirement. So keep in mind, I mentioned that if you had an employee that you used to meet this 35% criteria, and that employee was in your employ for at least 6 months, and they lived in that area for at least 6 months, even after they moved, you would still be able to count them as a HUBZone employee. And you would still be able to maintain your HUBZone certification as long as at least 20% of your employees reside in a HUBZone. Now, this is critical because if you're active in receiving HUBZone certified contracts, you may have to hire additional people. And it may be that you're not able to hire a lot of people from a HUBZone area. So as long as at least 20% of your employees reside in a HUBZone area, and the reason you dip below that 35% is because you've received contracts, we will not penalize you. Next slide, please. So just a graph to show you how well we've not done in meeting the HUBZone goal. So we've done, like 2%, and that was in 2018. And in 2019, I think we did almost 2.2%. However, that's not 3%, so we're still struggling to meet that HUBZone goal. Next slide, please. And that's why we're encouraging more firms to get certified. So this is the basic criteria. This program is race and gender neutral. So of course, it's a small business program. You have to be small in your primary industry classification. And as I mentioned, at least 51% owned by a U.S. citizen or an Indian tribe or an Alaska Native corporation or a Native Hawaiian organization. The program allows for ownership by a community development corporation or a small agricultural co-op. Your principal office must be located in a HUBZone area. And the principal office is the location where the majority of your employees perform their work. And at least 35% of your employees reside in a HUBZone area. Next slide, please. And I want to add that there is no length of time in business requirement for the HUBZone program. The only program that we have that has a length of time in business requirement is the Section 8A program. The HUBZone program is an electronic process as well, and you have to have an active SAM registration. Next slide, please. For this program, we conduct calls every Thursday where our headquarters office conducts calls every Thursday where you're able to participate and ask questions. But just know that the Louisiana district office is available to assist you with your HUBZone application. And you can obtain a copy of the checklist at sba.gov/HUBZone, and also at sba.gov/HUBZone, you can check the maps And what you want to do is to put in your physical address in the mapping program. The system will tell you whether or not you're in a hub zone, and we encourage you to print out that page that says that you are, and you'll use that same mapping program to check whether or not your employees are in a hub zone. Next slide, please. The benefits, we've talked about the HUBZone set-aside contracts and the sole source contracts and the price evaluation preference. All of that's available to you as a part of the HUBZone program. Because that 3% goal is a flow down goal to our major prime contractors, then you would be able to work as a subcontractor and assist that prime in meeting their subcontracting goal. For the HUBZone program, you're going to submit your application through the general login system, the eWeb link that's listed there. Next slide, please. So a knowledge check. There is no length of time in business requirement for the HUBZone program. Is this true or false? Thank you guys so much for participating. It is true, because the HUBZone program does not have a length of time in business requirement. Next slide, please. Oops, you skipped one. Can you go back? Okay, the HUBZone applicant's principal office must be located in a designated HUBZone area. True or false? Okay, thank you all for participating. This is true. Remember, the principal office must be located in a designated HUBZone area, and the principal office is where the greatest number of the employees work. Next slide, please. So that's true. Let's look at the Women on Small Business program. And this is critical. Next slide, please, because there are some major changes in place right now. So of course, this program was put in place to assist the federal government in achieving its 5% goal of doing business with women-owned small businesses. I mentioned earlier that we've only met that women-owned small business goal twice since this program has been in place. Also, to assist women-owned small businesses to build capacity and grow by limiting the competition on the federal government's contracts, and thereby improving their accessibility to federal government contracts, and to afford our women-owned small businesses access to set-aside contracts for women-owned small businesses and economically disadvantaged women-owned small businesses. Next slide, please. And so you'll start hearing me say WOSB and Ed WOSB. So here's where we are. The final rule for the WOSB program was published in the Federal Register on May 11, 2020. And this final rule required that SBA do a formal certification for the WOSB participants. This means that self-certification will no longer be allowed for the WOSB program once this goes into effect. So right now, where we are, as of today, there is a free online certification platform that's new through beta.certify.sba.gov. We started accepting applications in Beta Certify on July 15th. Now, if you are not certified by SBA, meaning that you've submitted this formal application and gotten a letter from SBA certifying you, you will not be eligible to receive any of the contracts that are set aside for the WOSB program. Now, if you bid on a contract and it's not set aside for WOSB, and you are you check that you are a woman-owned small business, then the federal government can still count you toward their WOSB goal. However, keep in mind that without SBA's formal certification beginning October 15th, you won't be eligible to bid on any of the WOSB contracts. Next slide, please. I mention this because there were more than 12,000 WOSBs that had completed the self-certification in the old platform in Certify. As of last Monday, I believe that was the 28th of September, we had only received just over 1,200 formal applications for the certification. So we're concerned about that because we don't want anyone to miss out on being eligible. So we've updated the WOSB program timeline because we had to direct more attention to assisting businesses that were affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So we had to reallocate some resources. Now we're back on track. So these are the key dates. Between May 11th and July 15th, those that were in the old certified platform were able to download their documentation from Certify. Between July 15th and October 15th, we're encouraging all our WOSBs to submit their formal application through Certify. And then on October 15th, which is next week, SBA is going to begin issuing decisions on those applications. Now, up until that time, if someone wanted to bid on a solicitation that was let prior to October 15th, then they would need to have that self-certification. And because the solicitation was issued before October 15th, even if the contract is awarded after October 15th, they would be eligible for that award. But please know that any contracts that are let or issued or solicitations that are issued beginning October 15th and beyond, in order to be eligible, you must have the formal SBA certification. Next slide, please. So we began to operate on a different platform other than Certify on July 15th. What you'll notice is that it has the same look and feel. There's a different name, which is beta.certify.sba.gov. You'll notice that the login criteria is different. We're using login.gov, excuse me, and you will still need to connect your SAM account to your beta.certify.sba.gov. So we received several questions regarding this. Which was, if I have an account in Certify, does that mean that I have to set up an account in Beta Certify? Yes, you do, because it's two different platforms. And we are working with SAM to incorporate your certification onto your SAM profile and your dynamic small business search profile, because that's where the contracting officer will look to confirm that SBA has certified you. Under the self-certification process, the contracting officer had to review the documents that you had uploaded and certified. Now, effective October 15th, all of that's going away, and they'll be checking Beta Certified to make sure, checking SAM and Dynamic Small Business Search. Excuse me. Next slide, please. So this is the new platform, beta.certify.sba.gov. As I mentioned, similar look and feel, but there is a lot of help on this page. So there is a help tab where you can send an email up to our headquarters, Women on Small Business office. But there's also a knowledge base with how-to videos, user guides, frequently asked questions, and much more. And on this page, there's a link that says, "Am I eligible?" that allows you to basically walk through some questions to see if you meet the minimum criteria before you begin to submit your application. Now, because we are attempting to preserve the integrity of this program and to preserve your data that you submit with your application, the people in the field like us in the district offices do not have access to beta certify in terms of looking at your application or checking the status of it. This is a need to know system, and it's been determined that us in the field have no need to know. So only those business development, government contracting and business development personnel in headquarters who have a role in the certification process have access to the data that you submit. So you don't have to worry about it being disclosed outside of headquarters. Next slide, please. So the login through login.gov, this is what this page looks like, and you're setting up an account and logging in through SBA Connect is a two-step process. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, self-certification is continuing until October 15th. That's critical because the government may let some contracts between now and October 15th. We will still accept third-party certifiers to demonstrate evidence of self-certification. You would need to upload that into your certified platform. However, you can start your beta certified application now. You want to save your documents to a flash drive, to your desktop, somewhere where you can access them, because the system is interactive. As you're going through the application process, just like with 8A, you'll be asked to upload certain documents. You want to have those documents ready. If for some reason you bid on a contract October 15 or after, and we haven't completed the processing of your application, you can request an expedited review of your application if you are the successful offerer. We are looking at those applications as they are submitted, and you'll receive something from SBA notifying you whether or not your application is complete and ready for processing. We're given 90 days to process a complete application. And notice that I say complete, because if we have to come back to you and ask you for any information, that means that your application was incomplete. Everything's going to be done within beta.certify.sba.gov, and you will receive a formal letter from SBA notifying you that your application has been approved or whether or not you've been declined. If you're declined, you have to wait 90 days before you can apply again for certification. And there is no formal appeal process for the applications. Next slide, please. So after October 15th, we still have third-party certifiers, which are the El Paso Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the National Women's Business Owners Corporation, the U.S. Women's Chamber of Commerce, and the Women's Business Enterprise National Council. Now, whereas you're able to submit your application directly through Certify without using one of these third-party certifiers, there's no fee. However, if you use one of these third-party certifiers, they do charge you a fee for processing your application. And once they give you your letter or your certificate, then you would go to beta.certify.sba.gov to upload that certificate and complete the application process. Because even with that certificate from them, it means nothing unless SBA completes that formal certification for you. Now, because in private industry, some of the those companies like the oil and gas industry or Entergy, the hotels, the casinos, the big box stores, some of those organizations, even the auto industry, are corporate members of some of these entities, especially the Women's Business Enterprise Council. And they get credit for doing business with a WBE, a Women's Business Enterprise, okay? So if that's your target market, then by all means get the certification from the Women's Business Enterprise Council. And then if you want to do business under the federal government's WOSB program, you can upload that certificate and complete the remaining portions of the application process in beta.certify.sba.gov. Next slide, please. The other program changes are that we know that we have individuals who are getting verified by the VA through the Center for Verification and Eligibility, through the CVE process. So if you're a veteran and you want to apply for WOSB certification and you own 51% of the company and control and management, then you can submit the verification that you've gotten from the VA as a part of your application. Regarding our Section 8A firms that are submitted, that are approved for the program, if it's within the first year of your certification, then you can use your your certification letter as a part of your application, or your annual review letter that you receive from your business opportunity specialist to qualify you as an Ed WOSB. And then effective July 15th, what we've done is we've aligned the 8A and the Ed WOSB standards for economically disadvantaged. And I covered those earlier. And regarding the individual retirement accounts previously, in order for those to be excluded, you could not have access to them without a penalty. Now, as long as that IRA account meets IRS standards, we exclude that from your adjusted net worth. Next slide, please. So the Ed WOSB program or certification is a component of the WOSB program. So if you meet the criteria for Ed WOSB, then you're automatically certified for WOSB. So it's not necessary for you to do 2 applications. Now, not all NAICS codes are eligible. There are 113 eligible industries, 92 industry codes for WOSB, and 21 industry codes for Ed WOSB, for a total of 444 NAICS codes. Now, it is not necessary for your primary NAICS code to be one of the 444 in order for you to apply for the WOSB or Ed WOSB program. That only would be applicable with respect to the contracting officers setting contracts aside. So even if your primary NAICS code is not one of the 444, you can still apply for WOSB and Ed WOSB certification. It costs you nothing to do that. Next slide, please. So this is the basic eligibility criteria. You must be a small business, and 1 or more women must directly own and unconditionally control the company, at least 51%. They must hold the highest officer position, manage the company on a full-time basis, and at least one of the women must devote full-time to the day-to-day operations of the business, which means that at least one of them cannot be engaged in outside employment. And the women must possess the managerial and supervisory control of the company or over the individual who possesses the required licenses or technical expertise if the women don't possess those licenses, meaning that they're the qualifying individuals on those licenses. Next slide, please. The same criteria applies to economically disadvantaged women-owned small businesses. Next slide, please. Except we look at your financial status. So your adjusted personal net worth must be less than $750,000. Your average income as an individual for the past 3 years has to be $350,000 or less. And the fair market value of all of your assets must be $6 million or less in order for you to qualify as Ed WOSB. If for some reason you don't meet this financial criteria, you can still apply for certification as a WOSB. It just means that you would only be able to compete on those contracts that are set aside for WOSB, but not Ed WOSB. However, because an Ed WOSB is automatically certified as a WOSB, they can compete on the Ed WOSB set-asides and the WOSB set-asides. Next slide, please. So regarding the Ed WOSB certification, if your spouse, your husband has a financial position in the company, or if they're providing financial support to the company, if they have a role in the business, like an officer, an employer, or director, or if they've loaned money to the company, provided credit, financial support like loans, or if they've guaranteed loans of the business, then SBA may consider the spouse's financial situation in determining whether the qualifying individual for the Ed WOSB application is eligible. Next slide, please. So this is what's remaining the same even with the changes, that 51% ownership requirement by the women, that they have hold the highest officer position, and that they receive the highest compensation from the business. The proper NAICS codes when it comes to the contracting officers setting contracts aside. However, it would not be applicable to you if you were just applying for certification and your primary NAICS code was not one of the eligible NAICS codes, that you have the managerial experience and technical expertise, that at least one of the women devote full time to the company, that they manage the company and not engaged in outside employment. And for the WOSB program, there is no minimum time of business in order to qualify for this program. So it's not a case of you're having to be in business for a certain amount of time or years. Next slide, please. So to stay up to date on the changes, we're encouraging you to sign up for SBA updates at sba.gov. And also you can visit sba.gov/WOSB ready for any changes or updates. You can also contact our office, the Louisiana District Office, at 504-589-6685. And I do have a slide at the end of the presentation with my contact information on there. Next slide, please. So WOSB Ready is our way of getting the word out to the small business community, urging our women-owned small businesses to apply for that formal certification. And that's why we were so delighted that Good Work Network afforded us an opportunity to be able to make this presentation to you tonight so that you would be aware of the upcoming changes for the WOSB program. Next slide, please. So when it comes to the government contracting for the WOSB program, next slide, please. I think you have to hit it 3 times probably. Okay. Okay. So with this program, in order for the contracting officer to set contracts aside, it has to be in one of the eligible NAICS codes or one of the eligible industries. For competition, there has to be a reasonable likelihood that there are at least 2 or more WOSBs who could submit an offer and submit it at a fair and reasonable price, and that the contract can be awarded at a fair market price. Next slide, please. That's for competition. What you'll notice is that in the listing of NAICS codes and industries, that you will not see any NAICS codes in major groups 42, 44, and 45. That's because if you're in the business of providing products or supplies and the government is buying products or supplies, they have to post those solicitations under the manufacturing NAICS code. So if you're a regular dealer or you provide products and supplies, when you're searching for contracts in the Federal Business Opportunities website, you need to search under the manufacturing NAICS code. Next slide, please. So for sole source contracts, of course, it has to be an eligible NAICS code. The contracting officer has to have a reasonable likelihood that the contract can be awarded at a fair and reasonable price, and that it's below $6.5 million for manufacturing or $4 million for all others, and that there is only one WOSB or Ed WOSB that can perform this contract. Next slide, please. So what the contracting officer has to do is to conduct market research. They will search SAM or Dynamic Small Business Search, or they may send an email to us asking us if we have any woman-owned small businesses of which we are aware who could perform that contract. They may post sources sought notices or requests for information notices in the Federal Business Opportunities website at Beta SAM. Okay, that's the part of their conducting market research. If you see a sources sought notice or a request for information, we encourage you to respond, because that will help the contracting officer make a determination if there's at least one company out there who, or only one company who could perform that contract, but also if they're looking to set it aside for WOSB or Ed WOSB, then that will let them know that there are at least 2. So with conducting that market research, in order to do a sole source, the contracting officer has to determine that there is not 2 or more WOSBs or Ed WOSBs who could reasonably be expected to submit a bid on that contract. Basically, that there is only one, depending on the NAICS code, and that the contract can be awarded at a fair market price and it's within the statutory limitations. Next slide, please. So on October 15th, the contracting officers will no longer have to check your documentation in the certified platform. They will rely upon what's on your SAM profile and what's on Dynamic Small Business Search. Now, it is important that you remember, in order to be eligible to receive a contract from the federal government, your SAM profile must be active. Next slide, please. So our goals, of course, for this program is to bolster the number of federal contract awards to WOSBs and Ed WOSBs to help the government meet its 5% goal, and to make sure that this certification process that we have in place is transparent, centralized, and that is free. And that's what it is. It is transparent. Everything's out there in terms of the eligibility criteria. It's centralized through beta.certified.sba.gov, and you don't have to pay for this certification. And to ensure the integrity of the WOSB program, that's why we have that formal certification in place, so that the contracting officers will have the assurance that those firms who are receiving those set-asides for the WOSB programs are actually eligible, and is to encourage the contracting officers to set contracts aside. Next slide, please. You will be required to annually represent and certify that you continue to meet the eligibility criteria under which you were certified. And you must submit that within 30 days of your anniversary date. If for some reason SBA has to request additional information from you, we will do that in writing. You will also be subject to a program exam every 3 years. And that basically means that that is a full documentation review, and we will conduct site visits as necessary, especially if you're one who is receiving or who are receiving a lot of WOSB set-aside contracts. If there are any material changes that would affect your eligibility, you're required to notify us within 30 days of any change, and that notification must be in writing, and you must upload it into your profile with SBA. Next slide, please. Of course, we want you to get the most out of the WOSB program, because we want to see an increase in the prime contracts that are awarded and your eligibility for subcontracting opportunities. One of the ways to improve your capacity and capability is through joint ventures and participating in the All Small Mentor Protege program. We also encourage you to take advantage of any training and management of technical
I'm sorry, but I believe Joe has internet connection issues. It appears that she has frozen. Yes. So what we'll do is we'll wait a minute and see if she can reconnect.
Hello, I'm
Oh,
here. I'm sorry.
She's back. She's back. So we'll let her catch up to where she was. I apologize. In the end, this new era we are in, sometimes this happens. But thank you for your patience.
Where did you lose me? Did we got through this slide, right?
I think we did. Perhaps we were on to the next one.
Okay, so this is just the contact information for reaching out to SBA. And thank you so much. She said when I said the word technical, so that technical assistance, the training and all of that is available to you on SBA's website. So we encourage you to take advantage of that. And also technical assistance is available through our resource partners like the Small Business Development Center, SCORE, and the Women's Business Resource Center. And if you are a veteran, our Veterans Business Opportunity Center. Next slide, please. Okay, so knowledge check for the Woman Owned Small Business Program. There is no length of time in business requirement for the WOSB program. True or false? That's correct. There is no length of time in business for the WOSB program. So you can be a new start company and apply for WOSB certification. Next slide, please. To be eligible for certification in the WOSB program, the WOSB must be in one of the eligible NAICS codes. Is that true or false? Okay, that's false. Okay, you do not have to be in one of the eligible NAICS codes in order to apply for certification. The NAICS codes are eligible or applicable only when the contracting officers are looking to set aside a contract. Now, the reason this is critical, your primary industry may not be one of the eligible NAICS codes, but you may have related secondary NAICS codes that are eligible for the contracts to be set aside. So that is false. Next slide, please. At least one of the women business owners must devote full time to the day-to-day operation of the business. Is this true or false? Yes, this is true. Thank you so much for your participation. I appreciate that. Okay, next slide, please. So we want to look at our service disabled, veteran-owned, and our veteran-owned small businesses. Next slide, please. Now, I want to let you know that this is not a certification that SBA handles. However, because it is a small business program, and if there are any protests, SBA will handle those protests. We always want to include information for our veterans. So the general definitions for service disabled veterans is that it's a veteran with a disability that's service connected. And a service disabled veteran-owned small business is one that is at least 51% directly owned by a service disabled veteran. And this individual must manage the daily business operations of the company and control it, and they must be small in their primary industry classification. Next slide, please. Those are the general definitions. So the eligibility criteria includes that the individual upon whom eligibility is based must be honorably discharged with a disability between 0 and 100%, under conditions other than dishonorable when they were discharged. And that includes, they may be in the reserve or the guard and on federal active duty, and they must be able to submit their DD 214 as a part of their application. Next slide, please. So you must be small, and what you'll notice as we've gone through all of these certifications is that 51% ownership. And the same thing applies for the veterans. They must own 51% of the company and have that direct and unconditional ownership of at least that 51% of the business. A mistake sometimes that the veterans make on that application that they have to submit, they're instructed not to include any socials for any non-veterans. And when they include socials for non-veterans who may be owners, then that causes their application to be declined. So please make sure that when you're completing your application, you do not include any socials for non-veterans. The company has to be owned and controlled by the veterans or service disabled veteran. And multiple vets may make up the 51% ownership. Now, we know that Louisiana is a community property state, but for the veterans program, joint ownership is automatically presumed by law in the absence of specific evidence that will point to the contrary. For instance, if you had a marriage contract, or we may refer to it as a prenuptial agreement. Next slide, please. The veterans must have full decision-making authority, be the one that sets the strategic policy and control the day-to-day operations, be the highest compensated, hold the highest officer position, and they must also be the ones who are the qualifying individuals on any required licenses or permits, have the managerial experience and technical expertise to operate the company. Next slide, please. You have to have an active registration in SAM. If you want to work with a certified verification counselor, you can go to the www.va.gov/OSTBU, and OSTBU stands for Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization/verification, to find a certified verification counselor. And also we have someone here in the New Orleans area who works very closely with veterans who are looking to get their CVE, their Certification and Verification of Eligibility, completed. It is an electronic application, and there is a two-step verification process when you're setting up your vendor information page. The VA uses login.gov as well, that screen that I showed for the Women on Small Business program. So to begin in setting up your vendor information page, you go to the www.vip.vetbiz.va.gov, and you will receive written notification when your application is approved. Next slide, please. And this is what that VA page looks like. So the VA has Vets First Verification Program. Vets First means that the VA looks to award contracts to verified veterans before any other socioeconomic group. So what you'll notice is that there are contracts that are set aside by the VA, but also other federal agencies. Now, in order to be eligible to receive the contract from the VA, you must have this verification. However, even though the other agencies don't require it, they desire it. Okay, so we're encouraging everyone to at least get this verification from the VA. You will be required to apply for re-verification, and I think right now it's at every 2 years. It may be every 3 years. However, because it can be a lengthy process, we encourage you, when you're coming up for re-verification, to start that process at least 3 to 4 months in advance of your expiration date, just in case the VA has to come back to you and ask you for additional information. Next slide, please. So putting the pieces together, we're here to help. You know, what is it that we can do to assist you in your growth and development? How can we help you? Next slide, please. This is a slide where we're asking everyone to give us some feedback on this presentation, but also where you can let us know any improvements that we need to make. And the next slide, Greg, has my contact information on there. We are working virtually. Our office is, the physical office is closed, but we are here to assist you. The best way to get me is via email, the joe.lawrence3@sba.gov, or via my cell at 504-256-5293. You can call me on that or text me. However, you know, I'm always checking my email, and with the pandemic, we have been getting a lot of calls. I don't always get through voicemail. So if you call me on that cell and I don't get back to you, you can call me again, send me a text, or send me an email. Also, our office, we have someone who's checking our main number at 504-589-6685, 504-589-6685, and those messages are pulled from that number throughout the day, and someone gets back to you. And for those that are for me, my teams will send me emails, you know, asking me to respond. So just remember that we're here to help you. I know that our focus today was on certifications, but we want you to remember that we're here to assist you with your financial and capital access needs as well. And if you're a survivor of, one of the hurricanes or whatever, we have disaster assistance available for that, as well as the assistance that's available for COVID-19 through our Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program. So we are still accepting applications. So Greg, I'll stop there to see if we have any questions.
Let me see if we have any questions for you, Joe.
Okay.
Okay. If you could, oh, we have somebody using, okay. No, if you could please use the chat function for questions. I think it'll be a little easier than the question and answer box.
Okay, because
So
it
if you
looks like
could-
there are some questions in Q&A.
No, he was putting, one person asked they want to know where they can go to learn more about 8A.
Oh, okay. So for 8A, we conduct the monthly session on the second Wednesday of the month, and we do post that on our website. We were doing those in person. We've switched to doing them virtually now. However, if there's some specific questions that you have, I can help you with that, or I can get one of the business opportunity specialists to work with you. And we also have a contract with Ruffin and Associates, whose role is to assist businesses with their 8A certification, and basically with what we call procurement ready, that when you get certified, you're actually able to get started with getting contracts.
We have another question. A brand new startup, and they want to know if you assist startups.
Yes, we do. Okay, so with our startups, depending upon where you are, we'll match you with one of our SCORE mentors who sit down with you. It'll be someone that has some experience in what it is that you are proposing to do, the type of business in which you're in. And so, yeah, we do have help for startups.
We have someone else ask, what's the difference between WOSB and WeBank?
Okay, so the Woman-Owned Small Business Program, WOSB, is the federal government's contracting program and the federal government's certification. WeBank, the Women's Business Enterprise Council, is a private industry certification. And you would want that if you were interested in doing business in the oil and gas industry or the hospitality industry, or with the auto industry, the casinos, the big box stores, because those organizations get credit for using businesses that are certified as WBE. So with WeBank, you get the Women's Business Enterprise certification, but that's not the same as the WOSB certification. So they can do a portion of that. We call it the third party certifier, but you would still need to submit the letter that you get from them and that certificate to SBA through beta.certify along with your other supporting documents.
I have another question here for you, Joe.
Okay.
I need to go to where for the EDWSB Ed WOSB certification?
You will go to beta.certify.sba.gov, and beta is BETA. So it's beta.certify.sba.gov.
Somebody else had asked this question, not related to certification, that the EDIL funding has been exhausted for the pandemic.
No. We're still accepting applications for EIDL for the pandemic. So no, we have not exhausted our funds for EIDL. So if you need an EIDL related to COVID, please submit your application.
And we have another one on the WOSB program. Would you recommend one over the other, WOSB and WeBank, for a digital marketing company? I think they're asking whether they should be with WOSB or WeBank.
It depends on your target market. Okay, so since WOSB costs you nothing, I would say go on and do the WOSB certification. However, if you know you're going to be pursuing contracts with the private industry, then it may be to your advantage to get the WBE certification from WeBank. It just depends upon your target market.
We have another one on 8A. If you are within your second year of business but have not reached it yet, you still have to request a waiver for the 8A certification.
Yes, unless you can submit 2 years of tax returns showing revenue. You would need to request a waiver of the 2-year rule. Now, if you're coming up on that 2 years, say for instance, your 2 years, well, December 31st, you'll be submitting tax returns, and that's going to give you your 2 years. Just wait until you submit those 2020 tax returns and submit that with your 2019 tax returns, and then you don't have to worry about the waiver. Right now, we're not going anywhere.
Yes, I think we're all in that pattern. If you have any other questions while we still have Joe, please let us know so we can answer them. I know that this has been a very popular webinar, actually, because we had more than 30 people attend, which is incredible.
Right. Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And we're looking, you know, not that I'm just looking for more work, but we are definitely looking for more 8A firms, because, you know, you certify for 9 years. We have firms who are graduating, but we do want to get more firms certified. So we can use firms who are in all industries, but some of the areas like in temporary help or staffing, heavy construction, information technology, grounds maintenance, building maintenance or janitorial services. You know, those are some of the areas where I know we've lost some of our firms who, you know, were receiving contracts in those industries. And that's not to say that that's it, but we are looking for more firms to get certified.
I think that's all the questions we have for today. But I'd like to wish everybody well. I know there is a storm coming, and to be safe. And also, I would like to let everybody know that we do have other programs coming up, and then check our events page, such as we do have the Mastering Money boot camp coming up, which is really great, especially if you're struggling to learn how to read financial statements. It is an excellent, excellent program, and I encourage you to register for it, it'll be money well worth spent. I do have one other question. We do have somebody with an EIDL question. If they
Okay.
applied for EIDL and was denied, can they reapply?
Yes, if it's within 6 months. So what we want you to do is to look at the reasons for which you were declined and make sure that in your reconsideration request that you're addressing each of the reasons for which you were declined. But yes, you can, and you have 6 months to apply from the date of SBA's denial letter. And so far we have I believe they said 265,000 reconsideration requests on which we're working. So what we've done to kind of move those through is redirected some of our resources from those who were processing the initial applications for EIDL over to the reconsideration request so we can start working on those. So her question was, can you apply for more money? Okay, so if you need an increase in your EIDL loan, that would be considered a reconsideration request as well. So you would submit a request for a reconsideration through, a request for increase through the reconsideration process. So the reconsideration requests that we have are not just for denials, they're also for those individuals who are requesting increases. So yes, you can submit a request for an increase.
I think we're out of time. So
okay. So if they have more questions, Greg, they can either email me or you, and I'll get the answer to them.
That'd be great. So thank you all for coming. Please be safe, and we hope to see you again real soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you, Greg, for doing this for us. It's a big help. All right. Okay. Bye, guys.